What is the weirdest thing you found out about one of your teachers after you had left school? I had a science teacher who would, instead of teaching sometimes, would tell stories about his wife and how he saw her give birth. The stories were incredibly detailed about how he held his baby in his arms, covered with brown smelly stuff that had come from his wife. We all always thought he was super obsessed with his new son because he talked about him a lot. Then I graduated school and a few years later, one of my friends found out he wasn't even married, had never married, did not have a wife, and fabricated the whole thing. It's still strange to me. He would tell a class of 40 students over and over how gross but beautiful the birth of his son was. We had a slightly mentally disabled substitute teacher named Mr. Gordon that would come in from time to time. One day there was a rumor that he got fired. Can a sub be fired? From subbing at our school. Our class found his website for his Pomeranian dogs months later. He posted videos of himself, and upon watching them, we realized he was not disabled, as his speech was completely different/normal. Turns out he subbed quite frequently at other NJ schools too and always put on this act. I guess he kept himself entertained. After I left high school, one of the math teachers moved into the house across the street from my parents' house, where he lived with a couple other dudes. One night, I think I was like 19, I was having a party, so I walked across the street and asked him to buy me some beer, to which he replied, "Let's go inside, smoke a bowl, and talk about this." We went inside, hit a 3 feet long bong, and then he bought us beer. I grew up in a very conservative area. One of the most popular teachers in elementary school suddenly quit. All of the students were really confused as to what happened. In high school I found out that the teacher was gay and a bunch of parents got together, made his life miserable and basically forced him out of the school. Had a geography teacher with a serious heart defect who never expected to live past 30. Thus, he didn't give much of a fuck about what other people thought. The grade 12 girls were like a farm team for him, and upon graduation he wasn't too shy about dating them. He ended up dropping dead during a field trip. Actually a really awesome guy. I had an English teacher in junior high who was very energetic. He wore those bright anime Chinese dragon shirts all the time, and would sometimes replace English words for Mandarin ones. He was my favorite teacher. A few years pass, and around graduation we found out, somehow, that his wife was actually a mail order bride from Korea or Vietnam, I think. A classmate and I spoke to her, and their son briefly. He thought she was Chinese, and she had fully intended to run away as soon as she got here, but he was such an awesome guy she actually fell for him. We had an art teacher whose son committed suicide in his art room. He came back to teach the next year, but would refuse to teach any new student with the same first name as his son for fear they would do the same thing. Didn't find out until after I had finished, and a friend got a teaching job in the school 10 years later. Apparently one of the female English teachers was both an ex-Playboy bunny and a surfer. Mind you, she was also in her late 60s when I went through high school, but apparently the 1970s did her well. The year after I graduated, she broke her leg surfing. So I can't say I'm exactly surprised. My senior year of high school, we had a new gym teacher come in. He was a professional lacrosse player and young, so he got along well with all of the students. After graduation, we all found out he had been fucking one of the students, and they were dating now. Plot twist, the student, my fucking prom date. That one of my teachers had a fetish for riding horses naked with her husband. Someone found a photo that they posted online to some obscure forum. I saw the photos, it was not something pleasant to look at. They were both severely overweight aging hippies that have never spent a day in the gym in their whole lives. Also, she had lots of vaginal and nipple piercings. I can't get that photo out of my head. Shudders. I had a religious education teacher through my church who also taught/assisted with special ed classes at the church's private school. I remember her being very nice, very devout, but also very unfortunate looking. Honestly, she looked like a Jude. A few years later there was a scandal at the church about her getting pregnant out of wedlock. She claimed it was a drunken one-night stand. Turns out it wasn't. She had been tutoring/babysitting two special needs brothers from the school at her house as a favor to their single mom. One of them was the father. They were like between 13 and 17, if I remember correctly. The gossip/theory was that she was getting very desperate to have kids/family, but was unable to find a guy. So she figured she's used the boys as sperm donors and assumed that they were too disabled to understand/report what was going on. Kicker was that it's a Catholic church, so no one was looking at the female teachers when it came to child molestation. Not weird, just kind of cool. We used to go into my science teacher's office in our classroom and steal cigarettes from his desk. One time, my buddy found this little wood box about the size of a pack of cigarettes which was really colorful and had a swivel lid on the top. Inside was a metal tube, sticky with brown tar. He put it back, and a few years later, when I was in high school, I realized that it was a one-hitter. We were friends with his son, and after we graduated, we went out to their lake cabin to camp out. Mr. S, I'll call him, showed up and asked if any of us would like to get high. And we did. We got really high with my elementary science teacher. I went to an all-girls high school, and, while she wasn't a proper teacher per se, our guidance counselor would teach etiquette classes and stuff, so I guess she qualifies as a teacher. Anyway, a year after I graduated, Facebook blew up, and it was considered not out of the ordinary to add even former high school teachers as friends. So I added my former guidance counselor and pretty much witnessed her breakdown on social media. I don't know the details of her circumstances, but based on her long, all caps, raging status updates, she had separated from her husband. The lack of pictures of her kids gave the impression that she didn't have custody. Then she would post photos in which she was in clothes and poses inappropriate for her age or for her profession. Then she also posted photos of her joining a pageant. This was all very intriguing to me, so I used to check her profile out a lot when I was bored. During the Christmas New Year season a few years ago, she posted a status update greeting and tagging her male friends from several different countries. It was obvious she was trying to make it seem that she gets laid a lot, but it was also obvious she hasn't met any of those men in person. One day, Facebook said she was in a relationship with this very young and very good looking guy, and she was posting very showy and public messages to him. One of her friends asked her about the guy, and she replied that he was American and is in graduate school at a prestigious university. I forget now if it was Mid or Harvard. I checked the guy's profile out, and that guy is so fake. His pictures looked like it was all taken from a catalog. It looked like it was a model advertising full clothes. He wrote in horrible English too, and according to his profile, he is using Facebook in Turkish. Facebook showed this info back then. It was a huge scam, and there were posts where my guidance counselor was even questioning him regarding some dubious stuff on his profile, and he would always respond with a flimsy excuse. Anyway, it was very sad to witness, but very entertaining too. She deleted most of us former students from her friends list shortly after. I was working in a secured government building for a vendor about 50 miles from my very small hometown. One day, I need to use the restroom, and I walked into the store and sat down. On the back of the stall door is a graffiti description of a woman and how great her blowjobs are. The description gave the woman's first name and telephone number and suggested she could be contacted at any time for these services. It was the name and telephone number of my high school English teacher. I had a high school teacher who announced in front of the class that red lipstick was originally intended for prostitutes and that I shouldn't wear it. It was for whores according to her. She was pretty young, and I went to a public school, so I was surprised she had such outdated views on MacUp. Ignore my username, I'm actually a girl. I'll let it go, since she was an ex-Marine, and I thought she was probably just conservative. Fast forward a few years, and it becomes known she slept with a lot of her underage male students throughout the years, and had sex with other teachers. She was fired, and now competes in goth beauty pageants. TLDR. Teacher insinuates I'm promiscuous because I wear bold lipsticks while she sleeps with underage students. Now she's a gothic beauty queen. This isn't really weird, just terrible. We had a relatively young, mid-20s, Spanish teacher. Was the nicest guy in the world. Was heavily involved in the extracurricular activities. was even an organizer of the Japanese club because the Japanese teacher wasn't able to make the annual trip to Japan for health reasons. He was the favorite teacher of every student who had him, and even those who didn't. He had a breakdown about 2 years after I graduated, so 2010. His entire family had apparently been killed in a car crash a few years before. Mom, dad, brother, and pregnant wife. He had been holding it all in, avoiding the grief for several years, while leading an outwardly incredible life doing things he appeared to love. According to my brother, he broke down in the middle of one of his Spanish classes that my brother was in, stopped mid-sentence, started crying. He ran out of the room, and just left the school. A counselor sat in his class for the rest of the day, and it was basically a study hall. He didn't show up for a few days. He came back to the school for one day, apologized to his classes for what had happened that day, explained what had happened, and resigned at the end of the day. Apparently the entire foreign language wing of the school was renamed for him. Not sure what happened to him. I found this out while I was back home for the holidays this year. Was very sad to hear about it. The guy was an amazing teacher and beloved by his students and the staff alike. At my middle school, 2 of the teachers were gay and in a relationship. They lived together. One time, like 5 years later, we saw them eating together at a restaurant. The middle school had changed to a different type of school and pretty sure they are working at different schools now, so that means they probably were in a relationship. That was the rumor while in 8th grade. I just never believed it. It's not weird to be gay, it was just interesting how I didn't see it right in front of me and didn't care. It's interesting how gays receive so much hate and discrimination, and here it was right in front of me and it didn't make a difference in my life at all. We always thought the band director was gay, not because he seemed gay. He was actually kind of an intimidating person. It was just because rumors were always spreading around for some reason. A perkless in clothes with him would claim that he told them this, and it was well known that he lived with a roommate. Anyway, a couple years after I graduated, he had become an assistant principal at another school. An article appeared in the city newspaper one day that this assistant principal was caught in a city park at night getting a blowjob from a member of the Blue Man Group. It sounded so ridiculous we thought it was some kind of joke, but it was completely true. I remember my friends and I laughing our asses off at the absurdity and coming up with alternate headlines like Blue Man in local park. Luckily for him, it was only embarrassment he had to suffer. He is now the head principal of that school. In 2004 I had a social studies teacher that was awesome. Very passionate and involved in his students' lives. He was also involved in student leadership training program, SLTP, and would often go to workshops and chaperone overnight school trips with the students. He had an ex-wife and a daughter that he absolutely adored. Last year, our relatively small community found out that he had been soliciting young boys online via chat, pretending to be a female, for nudes. A lot of my peers had trusted him, and we were all disgusted with the news of what happened. My high school shop teacher was pretty racist and always bitched about his wife. A few years after I graduated, he was arrested for indecent exposure. He was hanging out in grocery store parking lots, putting Polaroids of his junk on young ladies' windshields, and waiting for their reactions. Same school, my art teacher one year had a very good relationship with most of the athletes. She was a big, older white lady and there were always basketball and football players stopping by her room while I had her. Turns out she was banging most of them. Did you think this was a funny video? Please like and subscribe. Any questions? Leave a comment.